and welcome to PFF Wire. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how are you doing today?
I briefly contemplated if I wanted to have a career change after last night. Really just kind of sat with my thoughts at halftime and thought there's probably better things to do than watch the rest of this game. No, I'm just kidding. It became so bad it was good. I know you were just firing off tweets about horses and Colts and Broncos and just trying to push through. But we made it, and hopefully some better games this weekend.
Uh, Honestly, yeah, it was so bad that it was good. Like, I thought that Al Michaels actually made kind of like a prescient point at that point where it was like, I mean, if a game's going to be terrible, it might as well be so bad that it just becomes a huge joke, which is basically what it did last night on Twitter. And I mean, I also would say that at least there was big personalities in the game. At least it was Russell Wilson. At least it was Nathaniel Hackett, who, as everyone's kind of clowned on earlier this season. At least it was the Colts with Matt Ryan and everything like that. Like, if it was just your typical 2016 Titans Jaguars game, no one would have been watching in the first place. But I feel like everyone just felt compelled to keep watching it. And I was thrilled when it went to overtime. I love overtime in general in every single sport. So a game that bad going into overtime was just fantastic to me.
Yeah, as much as it made sense to try to score at the end, which I agree with that decision, but I almost wanted them to kick a field goal just so it was a 12-12 tie, just because neither team deserved to walk away feeling victorious in any way, shape, or form from that game.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into that game a little bit more before we start doing our Friday injury roundup, before we start talking a little bit more about Russell Wilson as well. Yeah, I mean, the entire decision there at the end, I mean, I know that everyone has questioned Broncos decision-making really this entire season since week one, but I mean, 4th and 1, throwing into the end zone in general, I mean, I feel like, yeah, kicking the field goal there, probably not the best move. I probably personally would have ran the ball in that situation. And I know that, I mean, KJ Hamler has every right to be very, very upset. He was wide open on that play. I will say that, not to take blame away from Russell Wilson, anything like that. It was a throw he could have made. There was a pretty small window there that Russell Wilson could have fit that ball in, and he wasn't looking at KJ Hamler in that exact instance. So I don't know. It's tough to put too much blame on him for missing that exact play, but obviously Russell Wilson in general was pretty bad in this game.
Yeah, I think it would have had to be his first read in the progression for it to actually be available, and I'm not sure it was. In fact, if you go back and watch, there's a tight end. I think it was Russell Wilson's new favorite number 1 target, Eric Saubert. I think it was coming across the formation from the right to the left side, and he falls over. And I think that was actually one of his first reads. Right. And then there was Melvin Gordon also near the first down line, but I thought a smart thing could have been having a curl route or something that stops not in the end zone, but across the first down line, because the defense, at least when you watch it, seemed like they were protecting the end zone just as much as, if not more so, than the first down line. And you have time, you have the ability to get that first down and then reset. I agree with you. I probably do run the ball. Frankly, maybe that's where the Melvin Gordon fumbles and Javonte Williams being injured, that's maybe where that comes into play, and you're worried to do it. So just a calamity of errors there. But also, in a general sense, I think not enough is being made of about that possession before you get deep into Indianapolis Colts territory. Right. The clock is on your side because they use all 3 timeouts before the 2-minute warning. I'm not really sure why you're even throwing in the end zone on that play when it's Tyree Cleveland, who had barely played the entire game, matched up one-on-one with Stephon Gilmore, one of the best cornerbacks of the generation. Yeah. I'm not even sure why that ball is uncorked, why you're throwing period there. Just kind of a weird, situation to get into overtime. And then, of course, just an awful way to end it for the whole, all of Denver, who was not in the building at that time.
Yeah, the Broncos fans started to leave once it got into overtime, which was certainly pretty funny. And yeah, I mean, throwing to Tyree Cleveland when he's covered by Stephon Gilmore. Stephon Gilmore had a massive end to that game. I think he wound up having a 90.0 PFF grade overall. Now one of the highest ranked cornerbacks in the NFL, despite the fact that he's 32 years old, I believe he is at this point. So this is kind of a nice bounce back season for him after missing last year, or a lot of last year with injuries, and having an injury after his post defensive player of the year season. But yeah, I mean, I think that as far as the last play goes as well, yeah, the window was only open for a small amount of time. That wasn't Russell Wilson's first read. I think the bigger question there might have been, why wasn't that Russell Wilson's first read in the play? Was it the play design? Was that Russell Wilson's choice? Because, I mean, that play was essentially designed to get KJ Hamler open that quickly. There's also the question, though, and this goes on to a bigger conversation about Russell Wilson, is, does Russell Wilson have faith in wide receivers in that situation? Why is he leaning on Eric Saubert so much? I think that does play into a lot of the issues that Russell Wilson has had earlier this season, is that obviously he's not fully accustomed to the offense quite yet because he's new to it, but also the chemistry just is not there with his wide receivers right now. I just posted a piece to PFF.com basically asking a bunch of people around the league, what's wrong with Russell Wilson? And one person said that there seems to be a chemistry issue. And with Russell Wilson right now, with his current limitations, you cannot have any chemistry issues for an offense to work with Russell Wilson right now.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway for me last night with both quarterbacks was I think one guy looks more physically broken, and that, of course, is Matt Ryan. Yeah. And the other looks more just mentally fragile. And I think just kind of questioning himself, even bring up the interception to Stephon Gilmore in the end zone, he actually did have a little bit of separation. The ball was really late. And by that time, once he pulled the trigger, Gilmore was able to undercut the route. Maybe he didn't have a lot of separation, and Gilmore was kind of baiting that throw. But nevertheless, the ball was late. And I think you mentioned that. Why is he targeting just the shortest routes to his tight end 3 and all these things? And maybe it is a lack of confidence right now, a lack of trust in his players, but I also think he's just kind of second guessing himself a little bit. And he's always been a guy that has made some mistakes. He's a boomer bust type player, but you get the good with the bad. I think right now you're not getting a lot of the good, and you are getting still maybe more so of that bad.
Yeah, and he's one of PFF's lowest ranked passers this season. I know he dipped a little bit last year, but he also was dealing with a finger injury. There were some other issues in play. I think he had a 77-something PFF grade for us in 2021. But from the time that he was drafted in 2012 all the way up to 2020, he was the 5th highest graded quarterback in the NFL behind Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, and Drew Brees. So it was those 4 guys. Then you've got Russell Wilson. He's getting older, though. The mobility it's obviously going to diminish a little bit now that he's 33 years old. That was a big part of his game. That's what allowed him to create so many big plays. Once that goes away, then maybe you do have to question, why you paid a player who did rely on his mobility $245 million over 5 years when that contract is going to take him into, his 38, 39-year-old season, whatever it's going to be. And we can get into this a little bit later, but this plays into what the Broncos do this year, long-term, everything. They essentially do not have the option to cut Russell Wilson until 2025. Like, they can't save money on the cap. If Russell Wilson continues to struggle, clearly they can't trade this contract. So in order to make things work, I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow or even this season, but I think that they would probably look at making a change at coach or GM before quarterback at this point.
You'd probably think so. Yeah, it is tough because I think George Payton has done a great job as a drafter, but now he does not have first and second round picks going forward because of this trade. And obviously does not have a ton of, salary cap resources given you're paying your quarterback $49 million a year. So it is interesting. I would guess Hackett has the least, political capital in that building and maybe the first move to go. I do think it's fair to wonder if part of him getting hired was to bring Aaron Rodgers in, and then Russell Wilson became plan B. And now there's issues there because, Russell Wilson is lining up almost exclusively in shotgun. They're not really – people keep saying, this is the Green Bay offense. It's really not. Not that Hackett – he obviously had stops in Jacksonville and has been other places and has adopted other parts of offense into his game. But this is not what they do with Matt LaFleur in Green Bay. It's an under center, heavy play action, wide zone offense. That's not what we're watching in Denver. The last piece, too, you mentioned the mobility. Maybe the worst news then is Garrett Bowles, their left tackle, out for the season with a broken leg. One of the most consistent tackles in the NFL for us, over a 70 grade in every season of his career, and above 70 in both run blocking and pass blocking almost every single season. A 69.8 in 1 year that ruins that stat of it being always. And I think with Russell, the weird thing with him is he evades the first pressure, and he almost looks like he then thinks he has a full 3-second shot clock again. I noticed it 4 or 5 times last night. It's like, if you avoid the first guy, the second guy's probably right on your back, or the first guy's going to turn back around. He just doesn't seem to. There's a lot going on upstairs with him, I think.
Yeah, and entering that game, the Broncos had the 10th highest ranked offensive line by Sam Monson's rankings. So offensive line really wasn't giving Russell Wilson much of a problem over the first 4.5 games of the season, but now losing Garrett Bowles certainly exacerbates the situation. Already without Tim Patrick at wide receiver, now you're out Javonte Williams at running back. We mentioned it all offseason. Broncos were expected to have one of the best overall offenses in the NFL this season when you were taking into account wide receivers, running backs. Albert Okwuegbunam is not producing at tight end. As we mentioned, it's been Eric Saubert. You've seen Andrew Beck in there as well. So just overall, things are not looking good for the Broncos. Everyone expected that AFC West to be extremely strong this season. People expected the Broncos to be Super Bowl contenders. And that was another thing that a source said to me today is that he said, I never understood that. I never understood how he could come in right away with a new head coach, new wide receivers, everything like that, and lead them to the Super Bowl. Obviously, we saw that with Tom Brady with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but now that injuries have piled up, it is a bit of a different situation. Before we start the show, we were talking about Russell Wilson's, Broncos country, let's ride at the end of his press conference. It's like he can't help himself. He still threw it in there at the end of his presser yesterday. And like you were saying, he was like, Broncos country. Then he started to walk away. And I was like, is he not going to say let's ride? And then like under his breath, he was like, let's ride.
It was one of the strangest things I've ever seen where I don't know if he just didn't know how to end it and just wanted to get away from the podium as fast as possible. And maybe that's like his sign off and his, the easiest way to just end the conversation. But yeah, that was bizarre. I think in a general sense too, like we're not trying to overreact. We never want to, but for a guy in KJ Hamler who, look, yeah, he's an early draft pick, second rounder, but has basically not played football at all his entire career, slamming his helmet and standing there like staring at Russell Wilson. His post-game press conference, he said, like, I was wide open. I don't know, like for that guy to already be basically calling out the quarterback, basically questioning his decision-making 5 weeks into his tenure as a guy that, like, again, if Cortland Sutton is saying that, if Jerry Jeudy is saying that, it's a little bit different than a KJ Hamler. That's not disrespect to him. It's just, where are you on kind of the pecking order of the team? It's looking a little bit dicey right now in Denver.
Yeah, it definitely is. That's a very bad sign that a young player like that, would immediately do that after the game. I think he even said that he didn't hear Nathaniel Hackett's post-game speech because he was too busy being on the field. I don't know. It was a bizarre situation last night. Now they've got 10 days to prepare for week 6. We'll see if they can rebound here in the next 10 days. But, you do, obviously, Russell Wilson's issues this season on the field have resurfaced some of the, I don't even know how you would categorize them. Just like kind of Russell Wilson's oddity, or like just the fact that he isn't, the typical quarterback who's going to be, downing beers with the offensive line on the weekend. It's kind of unfair to bring that stuff up with him struggling. But at the same time, maybe these types of issues with KJ Hamler, throwing his helmet down and saying that he was wide open and being free to go to the press with all that stuff, it might not happen with a quarterback who is closer to his teammates. And I think we lost Brad. So I will continue to do a little monologue here. Maybe Brad decided to leave me once we got into the Russell Wilson off-field issues here. But Brad and I are going to go through some of the injury news here on Friday with Sunday's games coming up. So Brad, I see you're back here now. I'll throw to you. What's the biggest piece of injury news for today to people to watch out for?
There's certainly a ton. It's a long list, but I do think the loss of Kyle Pitts is huge for the Atlanta Falcons. Any upset shots they hopefully had against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think, are now completely gone without him in the lineup. I know he hasn't been super productive so far, but averaging 15 yards per reception on a 15.5-yard average at the target. He's been kind of this big play guy for them so far. Not a lot of consistent production, but has been, of course, an important part of their offense. I think he leads the list of guys that just kind of changes the dynamic of the game from already, an 8.5, 9-point underdog to can they even stay in this one with a pissed off Tom Brady.
You're also seeing Dawson Knox out for the Bills this week with a couple of different injuries. So that tight end position, in fantasy at least, I'm sure will be kind of a hot button issue for people searching for tight ends. Anyone out there on the waiver wire that you would suggest people pick up if they have Kyle Pitts or Dawson Knox locked in their starting lineups?
Yeah, fortunately for people looking to stream tight ends, there's a handful of options, and I guess fortunately Kyle Pitts, there's not gonna be much of a drop off based on his production
Yeah.
so far. So Gerald Everett, they have to keep an eye on him because he's also dealing with an injury now, but he has been a favorite target of Justin Herbert's for the LA Chargers. David Njoku with the Cleveland Browns, if he's still available, and then some guys that are more available. I think Evan Engram for the Jacksonville Jaguars, being kind of usage dependent, where if they look his way, he's been productive. There's been games where they have not really looked his way, but a decent matchup there against the Houston Texans. I think there are a handful of guys, Hayden Hurst, maybe Logan Thomas. I think he's also injured, unfortunately, as well. Might not play in that game. But yeah, so if you can find a healthy tight end, there are some decent options out there. It's a rough year for tight ends in fantasy, though.
It really is. Unless you've got Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews on the right week, it's tough sledding at the tight end position so far. Let's get into some other injuries. The Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, officially questionable to play against the New England Patriots on Sunday. You do have DJ Chark out of that game, DeAndre Swift out of that game. Amon-Ra St. Brown is an interesting one. That offense is really kind of run through him. They did have success against the Seahawks on offense, even without Amon-Ra St. Brown in that game. But I've talked to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I wrote a story on him last year. Kind of feels like he's one of those guys where if he can physically play, he will be out there. So he's certainly one to watch this week. Now with the questionable tag, he was out of practice on Wednesday and Thursday, did return on Friday.
That's a huge one. And the crazy thing is, and I'm sure Vegas knew to a degree that Mac Jones was not actually going to return, but the Patriots were 3.5-point favorites. The news came out today that officially Bailey Zappi will start this game, and they're now -3. So it does move off of the hook goes away, goes back onto the key number of a field goal. But I think if you have Bailey Zappi playing and Amon-Ra St. Brown playing, that's a lot of points. I get the Lions have the worst defense in the NFL, dead last in EPA per play allowed, but Zappi is their third stringer behind veteran Brian Hoyer. Looked decent, like we talked about probably in that game. Didn't look completely overwhelmed. Now gets an actual full week of practice with the number one stringers. But yeah, if those two players both return, I don't see how the Lions can't cover a field goal and probably outright win that game.
Yeah, and it was Jordan Schultz who reported that Bailey Zappi would start. I haven't personally heard that conclusively at this point, so we're kind of rolling with Jordan's word on that one. The last that I heard was that Mac Jones had a better chance of playing this week than he did last week, but a better chance of being ruled out on Friday for a Sunday game doesn't mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I mean, if Bailey Zappi does wind up starting that game, I know the Lions defense has been atrocious this year. I know that everyone's scoring points against them. I know that everyone's racking up yards against them. I don't know. Maybe Bailey Zappi can do it. I did think that Bailey Zappi showed some poise. I said before on this show that, the Patriots liked what they saw relatively from Bailey Zappi, but I think that, I don't know. I'm having a hard time seeing a Bailey Zappi-led Patriots offense putting up, 28, 30, 40 points, whatever it is. And that's kind of what you need right now to compete up against this Detroit Lions offense. So I don't know. I think the Patriots defense has been solid this season. Jack Jones, the rookie cornerback, had a great game against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. Jonathan Jones at cornerback has been great this season. Patriots have great depth at safety. They've got a good defense. So I think that if anyone can kind of slow down the Lions offense, it could be the Patriots defense. But if the Lions offense comes out, ready and rolling, I really don't know if the Patriots offense with Bailey Zappi at quarterback can compete with them.
I think the thing, too, is if the Lions do get a lead, the Patriots have been susceptible against the run. There's a reason why they just signed Jamie Collins, I think, to the practice squad, but, maybe will be activated in the near future. Losing Dante Hightower and Kyle Van Noy and a lot of these guys and replacing them with, Mac Wilson and Jelani Tavai and some of these players, there's been a noticeable difference against the run. So if Detroit gets a lead and then can bleed the ball pretty effectively and Zappi has to play from behind and maybe not have a lot of possessions to do so because of, a shortened clock, that seems like a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, it's funny. The Patriots, released Kyle Van Noy, didn't re-sign Dante Hightower. They didn't re-sign Jamie Collins right away because there was this, emphasis on getting faster at linebacker. And then Raekwon McMillan struggles in week one. Mac Wilson struggles for 4 straight weeks. Then you've got Jelani Tavai, who's a slower linebacker in there. You re-sign Jamie Collins because now you need some speed and size and everything. So, yeah, it looks like they're going to be returning back to form there at linebacker here coming up pretty soon. Tua Tagovailoa not playing on Sunday. We will see Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback, of course. You're also New York Giants are without a lot of weapons again this week. Kadarius Toney out, Wan'Dale Robinson out, Kenny Golladay out. It does look like Daniel Jones is going to play in that game. So that's another game where it's going to be tough for the Giants offensively to keep up with the Green Bay Packers offense. I know the Packers offense hasn't been fantastic this season, but you'd like to see Daniel Jones get some of those receivers back here at some point.
No doubt about it. It's another one where, frankly, the game script is huge because the Giants will be able to run the football on the Green Bay Packers. They've been susceptible against the run, and obviously Saquon Barkley is off to a phenomenal start to his season. His yards after contact is actually 4th in the NFL in just total rushing yards. That's how good
Right.
he's been. Yeah, but if they're down, how can they just keep running the football if they're down a couple scores to Green Bay? Probably not. So that will certainly be interesting how the game script plays out there because, yeah, he's throwing to Richie James and David Sills and that's going to be tough against. Look, Jair Alexander is back for this game for Green Bay. David Bakhtiari at left tackle going to play in this game as well. So some massive additions for Green Bay and losses for New York is the last thing those two teams needed.
Definitely is. Let's look at the Ravens game upcoming against the Bengals. You've got Rashad Bateman out with a foot injury. This is not great for the Bengals and for the Ravens that already have some pretty rough depth at wide receiver. Probably going to see a lot of Demarcus Robinson in this game. You might see James Prochet finally get significant amount of snaps. Probably see the same type of role from Devin Duvernay in this game with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. But, I mean, Rashad Bateman has basically been the only wide receiver, producing yards-wise for the Ravens offense. Devin Duvernay has been scoring a lot of touchdowns, but it's a tough time to lose Rashad Bateman when you're 2-2 on the season. The Browns and the Bengals are also 2-2, and this game against the Bengals could wind up having tiebreaker scenarios in the future here.
Absolutely. Yeah. It should be a great Sunday Night Football matchup. And I think the thing, too, when you lose the receivers is the Bengals are pretty quality coverers of tight ends. Sorry, I can't talk right now. But they have a good linebacker group and good safeties in Von Bell and Jesse Bates to potentially limit Mark Andrews. So if they were going up against a team that was, really susceptible against tight ends in the passing game, maybe they could get away with it by peppering him with targets. I'm sure they still will. I think this will be a high-scoring affair. But that also works against them in that you have guys like I mentioned, that can do a lot to limit what Mark Andrews can give you. That being said, I think both teams are going to be able to score a little bit. No DJ Reader for the Bengals, I think, is a massive, massive loss. Our second highest graded interior defender, will help that Ravens beaten up offensive line a little bit. Maybe Lamar can run the ball and Dobbins can get going and play a little bit better in this matchup. But yeah, the last thing you need is losing Bateman, that explosive ability. They currently rank 27th in wide receiver grading as is, with him being one of the better guys on that list. And as you mentioned, the depth is a bit of a drop off.
Yeah, they are still expected to sign Andy Isabella early next week to their practice squad. That obviously doesn't help them this week. But I know there was some question today from John Harbaugh about that whole situation with Andy Isabella. What I heard was that since it was late in the week, they figured they might as well just wait until early next week to sign him anyway. But the fact that he's not officially signed yet at this point still means something else could happen there at wide receiver. But yeah, just fantasy-wise, I mean, I kind of feel like Demarcus Robinson is an interesting fit if you're like in a deeper league or in DFS or something like that, as a guy who could kind of pop off a little bit with Rashad Bateman out of that game. Saints are depleted again this week. Jameis Winston not expected to start. He is doubtful. Dennis Allen already announced that Andy Dalton will be starting at quarterback for New Orleans, and he will once again be without Michael Thomas at wide receiver. Does seem like there's some optimism about Alvin Kamara in this game, but with Michael Thomas, you're almost reaching points of like Julio Jones over the last few years where you can't really count on him being on the field. Obviously, Michael Thomas was in even more severe situation over the last few years where he missed all of last year, has missed a lot of time recently, but it hasn't been a great start to the season for him either.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I think we've seen a lot this year of, when players get injured and they come back, there's such a risk of not re-injury to that injury, but also just injuries across their body because they're compensating for that, maybe lousy leg or ankle or whatever they're dealing with, and then they put more weight or more pressure on a different part of their body. And I think we've seen a ton of that this year across the NFL. And he just can't really stay healthy for an extended period of time. Was playing great when he was healthy, but like you said, you can't fully rely on that. One other wide receiver to mention, because we're talking about another receiver out, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, not available in every league, but kind of available about 50% of ESPN and Yahoo Fantasy Football leagues. Hasn't had a great start, but has not scored a touchdown yet and has topped 6 fantasy points 3 times in 4 weeks without a touchdown. It's supposed to be a shootout in that Raiders-Chiefs game, one of the highest totals of the week. I think it might be the highest total of the week. He gets in the end zone for you. I think he's a solid wide receiver streamer potential if you need a guy there.
Definitely. Now official, Mac Jones is doubtful to play on Sunday against the Detroit Lions, so you can certainly pencil in Bailey Zappi with like one of those golf pencils that doesn't have an eraser into the starting job there at quarterback for the Patriots, since Mac Jones, once again, doubtful with that high ankle sprain. That's despite the fact that he was limited in practice this week. One other wide receiver injury to monitor before Sunday is Tyreek Hill. Quad injury popped up, I believe, on Thursday. Mike McDaniel said that the Dolphins are hopeful that Tyreek Hill will play. Hopeful is one of those terms that I feel like everyone reports, like, oh, they said he's hopeful. Like, of course he's hopeful that he's going to play. It doesn't really ultimately mean anything. Like, optimistic would be one thing, but hopeful is just like, yeah, I hope he plays. Like, of course Mike McDaniel hopes that Tyreek Hill plays. So I would just say that that's obviously one to monitor there. And with Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback rather than Tua, if Tua was still the quarterback this upcoming weekend, I might say, like, throw in Cedric Wilson or throw in another Dolphins wide receiver or tight end. I don't know. Jalen Waddle might be the only wide receiver that you want to play if Tyreek Hill doesn't wind up playing in this game.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It could be potentially a big loss. That Jets secondary has looked better. Their front on the defense has also looked better. And Mike McDaniel made a comment about Teron Armstead and Tyreek Hill that they are on the Allen Iverson treatment, which is they can play without practicing, which I thought was a good way to put that. So, I think they could certainly, which is tough for fantasy purposes, but, have no practices all week and then maybe still be a go for the game. One other name to mention, I saw that he was not seen at the portion of practice open to media. No definitive statement yet, but Mike Evans, apparently no one saw Mike Evans at practice in the beginning. I haven't seen an update on if he, apparently was fine or what the deal was there. But again, folks, if you're looking for, all these players and who's going to be in, who's going to be out, don't want to wake up to that, 9:30 a.m. Alvin Kamara London situation like last week. So another name to monitor as, maybe something popped up late in the weekend. Historically, late in the week injuries are the worst. I mean, that's when it's more likely the guy's not going to play. Rondell Moore had kind of popped up with a knee injury late this week. It tends to trend worse than a guy that was limited throughout the week and then maybe is good to go. You hate to see a guy pop up on a Thursday or a Friday.
Absolutely. Another guy who had an injury late in the week, Jason Peters, seems like he's probably not going to wind up playing on the Dallas Cowboys offensive line this week. They do actually have some good depth there at this point, so they can throw in Connor McGovern still. They were pretty smart to get out ahead of things by signing Jason Peters so that he could fill in. Now you've got Connor McGovern back there. One other one, Keenan Allen, continues to be out this week. It's a tough situation there. Where that Chargers offense, I don't think is going to be firing on all cylinders until Keenan Allen can actually get back on the field, since he is, the one really dependable pass catching option for Justin Herbert on that team.
100%. I mean, the rest of the guys have been okay, but really not spectacular. Yeah. Josh Palmer's been okay. Gerald Everett's been okay. Both of those guys are not 100% themselves. And then also, the loss of Rashawn Slater at left tackle. Rookie Jamari Salyer did look great in week 1 against Houston, but Myles Garrett is now back, and I think Jadeveon Clowney is supposed to be back. He's questionable, but there's optimism he'll play there. Without those two guys, Cleveland held Marcus Mariota to 7 of 19 passing with an interception and no touchdowns without those guys. So you bring maybe both of them back, at least Myles Garrett, our highest graded edge rusher, against a rookie in Jamari Salyer. It could be a tough, kind of a trap game for the Chargers flying out east once again.
If you have Bears running back Khalil Herbert starting in your fantasy lineups, you might want to have another option there as well, because David Montgomery, questionable to play here on Sunday. And Brad, what's your take on that situation there?
Yeah, I can tell you there, I would be shocked if he does not play. I don't know to what capacity or how much he will play, but I would be surprised if Khalil Herbert gets a full, workload. I think it'll be a split backfield. If not, frankly, Montgomery overtaking the number one spot again. He is just one of those guys with injury, like an Adrian Peterson type, that just gets back faster than he's supposed to, and just recovers at a freakish level. So I would be surprised if he is not, like I said, at least taking, half of these snaps in the backfield for Chicago.
Absolutely. All right. Brad, any other injury news out there that you wanted to throw out for people to monitor?
I think we covered it all. Hopefully we covered it all. And if you have any questions or anything, of course, Doug and I are available as always on Twitter.
Absolutely. Make sure to subscribe to the PFF Wire podcast on Apple and on Spotify. Throw us a review on there. If you don't want to watch us here on YouTube, keep it on pff.com for all of your news and analysis. Download the PFF app. Subscribe to PFF Plus, only $79.99 a year. And go Mariners. The Mariners are currently beating the Toronto Blue Jays 3-0 in a best-of-3 wild card series. Grew up in Seattle. Mariners have not had a lot of success recently. So go Mariners, and we will be back with you guys again on Monday afternoon. And I'm going to stall here for a second while I get something going. All right. Yep. That will do it for this week's PFF, or this Friday's PFF Wire podcast.